Hi everyone, this is Cecil again, and I'm here in today's Yellowstone podcast to tell you that you're making a big mistake if you visit the Old Faithful area and all you do is watch Old Faithful geyser erupt. There is so much more to see, do, and explore in this area, which is known as the Upper Geyser Basin. Yellowstone has approximately half of the world's geysers, and most of them are located in the Upper Geyser Basin. 1 square mile, or about 2.6 kilometers, contains at least 150 geysers, not to mention the hot springs and other thermal features in the area. So what I'm going to be talking about is just how much more there is to see and do in this area. What I would like to suggest, guys, is that if you're listening to this podcast on Spotify or Google Podcasts or wherever, you go to YouTube and search for Yellowstone Tours. And when you search for Yellowstone Tours as one word. YouTube will ask you, did you mean Yellowstone Space Tours? And you say no, you want Yellowstone Tours. That'll take you to our channel. Click on it. You can search there for this podcast as well as numerous others of our virtual Yellowstone tours, which are videos showing you all of Yellowstone. You can also go to our site ysmotel.com/Old Faithful Map. That's our motel site, which is YS, short for Yellowstone, ysmotel.com/Old Faithful Map. If you are now following along on YouTube, I do have a map up of the Old Faithful area. And my first piece of advice for you is, when you're taking this grey road that you see on the left or the west of the map into the Old Faithful area, you'll see signs which say Old Faithful parking straight ahead. And they're right, there is Old Faithful parking straight ahead. But if you ignore those signs and turn left, that'll take you to the parking in front of Old Faithful Inn. You're much closer to Old Faithful Inn. You're also much closer to Old Faithful Geyser, as well as to one of the main boardwalks that runs through the Upper Geyser Basin area. Old Faithful Inn is one of the most amazing buildings you'll see. For my money, it is the most wonderful building in the entire national park system. It's basically constructed just about entirely of wood. It's this older building. It has so much character, such a great vibe to it. You can also incidentally grab ice cream in there, and for my money, one of the worst jobs in the entire Yellowstone National Park is those poor people who have to scoop ice cream after Old Faithful erupts. The lines tend to be really long, but that's another story. If you take a look at the map, you'll see that there is a semicircle around Old Faithful, and the one that I'm showing you is where the benches are. Now, of course, you will see this when you get to Old Faithful, and that is where most people would sit and watch Old Faithful erupt. There are other places that you can watch it erupt as well. One is at Old Faithful Inn itself. There is this balcony up on the second floor, and you can buy a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something a little stronger, sit on the balcony, put up your legs, and watch Old Faithful erupt. That is my favorite place to watch Old Faithful erupt. Now, there are other areas as well on the backside, as well as at the so-called observation point, which I'll be coming to shortly. There's another two main buildings there. One of them is the Old Faithful Lodge and Cabin. The other is the Snow Lodge. And there's also this really wonderful Old Faithful Visitor Education Center, which is well worth a visit. But let's keep our eyes and our feet outdoors. Once you've watched Old Faithful erupt, there are various walks that you can take. Now, we do have these in our Yellowstone Tours channel. For example, if you go and put in Old Faithful to Morning Glory, it'll bring up one of our videos which shows you the trail between Old Faithful and Morning Glory. There, that you were shown a moment ago was Giant Geyser, and coming up shortly on our right is going to be Grotto Geyser, and this little trail over here will take you up to Geyser Hill and Grand Geyser. The reason that I mention that is you may prefer to watch the videos and hear my narration while you're actually watching the pictures, but feel free to follow along on what I'm showing you on YouTube at the moment. What I'd like to do first then is do this trail that runs from Old Faithful all the way to Morning Glory Pool. There are 5 main geysers at the Upper Geyser Basin, 5 geysers which have their eruption time predicted. You've got Old Faithful, of course, you've got Castle, you've got Grand, you've got Daisy, and you've got Riverside. So as you make your way along this trail, the first main geyser that you're going to come to is Castle Geyser. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm showing you Castle. This was towards the tail end of an eruption that I filmed. But what I really like here is to see how this rainbow is forming. If the sun is in the right place, you'll see these rainbows at so many of Yellowstone's geysers, including, of course, Old Faithful. In fact, I've got one video that will tell you all about the Old Faithful rainbow. So we'll take this trail down. This is one of the few trails in Yellowstone where you're allowed to take your bicycle, and that's what I generally do, is hop on my bike and make my way down. Castle Geyser is a great example of a cone geyser. The cone is formed by sinter, and I explain that in a lot more detail in various other podcasts and our virtual Yellowstone tours. Now, you can go across the river, across the Firehole River, but for the purposes of this podcast, we're not going to do that. We're going to carry on straight, and you'll see various smaller thermal features. You'll see various hot springs. And then we will come to the trail to our left, and it's a loop trail, which is where the Daisy group of geysers is. Now, Daisy, as I mentioned before, is one of the geysers that is predicted. It's a rather unusual geyser in that its eruption occurs sideways. But there is more to the Daisy Geyser and the Daisy group than just Daisy itself. You'll see there's Comet Geyser, there's Splendid Geyser, and there's various other geysers and hot pools there as well. So please take a look at that. Then continuing on the main trail, we're going to see Giant Geyser to our right. Now we will get closer to this. Giant Geyser is a wonderful geyser. It was actually blown apart by one of its own eruptions. We'll then come to Grotto Geyser, which is almost always erupting, so keep your eyes open for that. Then there's a little side trail to Riverside Geyser. Riverside is one of the most easily predicted geysers in Yellowstone, so check out its predicted eruption times. You can either go to the National Park Service site, or I use a site, geysertimes.org. That's geysertimes.org, which I find to be a little more accurate than the National Park Service site. Continuing on the trail up to the north, we'll come to Morning Glory Pool. Morning Glory is one of the most wonderful sights that you're going to see in all of Yellowstone. The colors are just amazing, and I'm not going to talk about why. Right next to Morning Glory is the Artemisia Trail, which takes you past a number of thermal features, and it'll come out across the way from Biscuit Basin, and I go into that in a lot more detail in various of our other podcasts and virtual Yellowstone tours. Also part of the Upper Geyser Basin is Black Sand Basin, but I'm going to be focusing on the area around Old Faithful in this podcast. We can then retrace our steps, and right next to Grotto Geyser, you'll see a trail that's running to the right, and that'll take you towards Giant Geyser, which I talked about a moment ago, as well as 3 or 4 other geysers in this little viewing area that you'll see to the right of the main trail. You'll come across a few smaller thermal features, cross over the Firehole River, and then you'll come to 2 particularly beautiful hot springs Chromatic Pool, and Beauty Pool. So you'll want to stop there and take photographs there as well. Continuing in a general southeasterly direction, we then come to Grand Geyser. Grand Geyser is just as the name suggests, and if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm showing you a video, and I'm just going to get the volume up a little bit. Grand is such a stunning geyser, but there's more to it than just Grand. Check this out over here. You can see turbine and vent geysers going off as well. So you have Grand going, look at that little rainbow, you've got Grand going off, you've got vent, and you've got turbine, and they all erupt at one stage or another at the same time. One thing that's particularly cool about Grand Geyser is that it almost always gives an encore performance. So you'll find that Grand erupts, it stops erupting, vent and turbine carry on, and then Grand erupts for a second time, and almost always for a third time, and occasionally for a fourth and fifth time as well. What I always try and do when I'm geyser watching is try and plan my trip so that I get to the geyser that I want to see shortly before the predicted eruption time. And once again, you can use the National Park Service site, or you can use geysertimes.org. There are others, but those are the two that I tend to use the most. Continuing on this trail once again in the sort of southeasterly direction, you'll find there's another few loops. Spasmodic Geyser is one of my favorite geysers in all of Yellowstone because there's so much happening. You'll find that there can be 4 or 5 little eruptions occurring at the same time. Now, you will recall that I mentioned that at Castle you could take the trail to the right when you're doing the trail from Old Faithful up to Morning Glory, and this is the trail that we see now. It'll take you over the Firehole River, and really close to Castle Geyser is Crested Pool, as well as a number of other thermal features which make for really pretty pictures. Let us continue now. We'll come to Liberty Pool and then the Lion group of geysers, which are generally just center. You don't see stuff erupting there much. But what I'd like to do now to explain the rest of this area to you is let's go back to Old Faithful. And if you start at Old Faithful Lodge and just stand so that your back is towards Old Faithful and you're facing, your back is towards Old Faithful Lodge, you're facing Old Faithful Geyser, and walk then so that Old Faithful is to your left, and then you'll see a trail to your right. This goes over the Firehole River, and this trail gives you a number of different options. One of them is to turn to the right, and you'll start climbing up a hill to an observation point of Old Faithful. I think I've got that up here. Yes, I have, and I'm going to get back to that in a minute. So you'll climb up a hill. The rise, as you see, is 160 feet. You may huff and puff a bit, but it'll give you a very unique perspective of Old Faithful erupting, and this area is called Geyser Hill. So once again, try and get to the observation point just before the predicted eruption time for Old Faithful. Now, even though you're so close to such a major built-up area, this is one of the world's major tourist attractions, once you get off this trail, you're going to find you're in the forest, it's peaceful, it's quiet, you're not going to see that many people. Make sure you take your bear spray with you. Whenever you go away from a built-up area, make sure that you take your bear spray with you. So you can sit down, maybe have a picnic lunch, take a drink of your water, whatever else you have with you. Then you can either make your way back down to Old Faithful, or what I prefer to do is cut across to Solitary Geyser. The trail goes through the forest, and if you're watching on YouTube, I'm coming out of the forest here, and you'll notice all the white around. That white shows us, this is the center, that we're coming to an area that there either was a thermal feature there or there is, and clearly here there still is a thermal feature. You can see the steam coming off it, and that is Solitary Geyser. As the name suggests, it's called solitary geyser, as I've just shown you, because it's all by itself. And it's another one of those geysers that is really so cool, especially if you're there on a beautiful day the way that I was. There were 3 or 4 other people there. They left after a couple of minutes, and I was solitary in solitary geyser all by myself. And the surrounds are just really special, and then you'll see these little eruptions coming off coming off solitary every now and again. Then once you've done solitary geyser, you'll make your way back down to the boardwalk system, and you'll continue along a number of thermal features, and you can make your way back to Old Faithful. However, what you may like to do instead of going back across the river is do what I call the lower loop of this part of Yellowstone. There are numerous geysers here as well. You remember I told you that this entire area contains at least 150 geysers. I was doing this, what I call lower loop area, one day, and I wasn't really focusing on what was going off in the distance, and what should I see but Beehive geyser erupting. Now, Beehive is another one of those really cool geysers, and I don't know if I have published the Beehive, if I've published the Beehive geyser eruption yet. Here it is. I did indeed. So I mentioned that I was strolling along, not really paying attention that there is part of the Lion group of geysers. The trail behind us is the one that I mentioned to you that leads down. Okay, so there you can see Beehive geyser erupting. I didn't even see it. The trail behind us is the one that leads down to Grotto geyser. This is Hot Spring, and I'm focusing on Hot Spring, and I haven't even noticed that Beehive is erupting, and finally I see it. And this is such an awesome geyser. So I started dashing off to see it. You can see all these people here watching it. And one thing about Beehive, you can see when the wind is coming, I guess that would be from the north more or less, it blows all over the people who are standing next to the geyser. So you can get sopping wet. In addition, your camera can get covered in silica, the lens can, and then you might as well just throw away the camera or your phone. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, Beehive is not predicted, but if you're lucky enough to see it, it is a spectacular geyser. Also, I mentioned Hot Spring, I mentioned the Lion Group. Giantess geyser is another geyser that it doesn't erupt that often. I spoke to you about Giant geyser, that very, very seldom erupts. Giantess goes off a little more often. I've never seen it erupt, but one day I was sitting in my office and I noticed Facebook really lighting up. Giantess was erupting and everybody was rushing over there. And then a little while later, it erupted again. So this loop is also well worth doing. And then you can continue the loop as I described before, up to Grand and Turban and Vent, and watch that erupt as well. What I'd also like to mention to you is if we come back to Old Faithful, and we have the lodge behind us and Old Faithful in front of us, and then on our left, there is another little trail which so many people don't do, but it has a couple of really cool thermal features on this trail. One of them is Blue Star Spring, and that is such a beautiful spring, especially with the Firehole River behind it, and if you're there on a beautiful bluebird sky day, and then the trail drops down to the Firehole River and you've got bacteria mats, and I'm not going to tell you what bacteria mats are here, but you can see them in various of our other virtual Yellowstone tours and Yellowstone podcasts. You've got the bacteria mats coming into the Firehole River, and then the trail just ends at the parking lot at Old Faithful Inn. Folks, remember that our YouTube channel is a really good resource. I mentioned the Daisy Group, and what I'm showing you now is a hike from the Grand Loop Road towards the Daisy Group and closer in to the Old Faithful area. Many of these hikes we offer at our site, YellowstoneDayHikes.com. That's YellowstoneDayHikes.com, and we can give you a guided hike, in this case of the Old Faithful observation point and on to Solitary Geyser, and then also to Daisy Geyser. I'm now showing you the Daisy Group. Or you can just go to YouTube and search, for example, walking the Riverside Geyser Trail. Just put in Riverside Geyser to Grand Geyser, which I was talking about a moment ago, and what you're watching is the remnants of Riverside erupting. I was lucky enough to just be there without even having planned to be there, caught it erupting, and then I started making my way towards Grand Geyser. I had mentioned to you some of the other pools in the area. Let me just see if I can see you. There you go. And those are just two such spectacular pools before you get towards Grand. That's Old Faithful in the background there. So use our YouTube channel, put in whichever keywords you want, wherever you want to start the hike, wherever you want to end it. That is Grand Geyser, which had just finished erupting. And somewhere over here I should have shots of Spasmodic, but I don't want to waste your time on this Yellowstone podcast. Just remember that resource is there. Folks, if you are looking for a motel in the Yellowstone area, remember our motel can be seen at ysmotel.com. We have some great rooms at very affordable prices, literally located just 1 mile from Yellowstone. We offer more Yellowstone tours literally than anyone in the world. You can see those at yellowstonetours.net. That's yellowstonetours.net. The Yellowstone Day Hikes offer hikes in between 2 hours and a full day. Please check them out at yellowstonedayhikes.com. That's yellowstonedayhikes.com. And all of our Yellowstone podcasts can be seen at either on YouTube or at yellowstonepodcasts.com. Oh, if you're still watching, this is a grizzly bear that I saw on the way to Canyon. It was feeding on a bison carcass. Try and get here in the spring. That's the best time to see that sort of thing. Thank you so much for listening and watching this Yellowstone podcast, and catch you next time.